What is creativity? Is there like a fixed definition for it?
Well, people will start talking about the jet engine, the internet, the iPhone, but they're not creative thinking itself. Creative thinking is something...
Spherical thinking. What is that? And then how did you come up with the concept of it?
Well, spherical thinking really is that ability to... Your next guest will probably be upset about it and say, well, who's the Looney Tunes that came up with this bizarre question?
That's why we call it mystery questions. No one's gonna know. What if the thing that you're trying to do every day is the exact thing killing your creativity? Today, we're going to be diving into why creative people often feel like outcasts, how the brain literally rewires itself as we grow up, and why fitting in might be the most dangerous habit for you. Welcome to the Young Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Malina, and today's guest is Dr. Walton. He's a TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and creativity expert who has worked with organizations like NASA and the Virgin Group. Hello, Mr. Walton. Welcome to the Young Leaders Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Malina.
I'm super excited for our conversation. It's going to be an interesting one. But before we start, could you introduce yourself in a way that you've never introduced yourself before?
That's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Yes, I am a certified scuba diving instructor, and I've spent some time building concrete boats in Greece.
Oh, that is very different. A lot more different than I was expecting. And nevertheless, I guess we can get right into the conversation because I'm actually really excited. I have a lot of questions for you today. So we'll start off with, I will start off with your journey on like what you've done, where you are right now.
Creativity has always been a passion of mine. I was born of very creative parents. My dad actually was a world-renowned artist, and my mother was also very skilled painter. And one of the things looking back on it that I noticed was that very creative people often have very loose relationship with social norms. In other words, they don't worry too much about fitting in. They don't worry too much about the standards that other people set for themselves. And that was certainly true of my parents. My dad was 60 when I was born. He was actually born in 1894, believe it or not. And my mother was 25. And they thought nothing of that age difference. They had their art in common. But my mother paid the price for our not fitting in, because that can really cause a lot of mental disturbance. You know, you notice this in the blind and the very deaf. You know, it's not exclusively about creative people. You know, the people have difficulty relating to both the blind people and deaf people. And they have also tend to have mental problems. So my mother was institutionalized when I was 7. That was really the dark side of creativity, in that had contributed, I think, in a major way to her psychiatric problems. But creativity has an enormous number of very positive things. And when we're very young, we can only think creatively, because the other side of how we think is deductively and analytically. But you can't do that if you haven't got any data. You have to use a little bit of history to think deductively and analytically. So when we're very young, we don't have that. So we have to think creatively. And that is still, you know, at the age you are, that is still a significant contributor to the way that you view the world. And so one of the things that is very clear to me, I have coaching clients that are teenagers and pre-teenagers, some of whom are also neurodiverse, ADHD in particular. And one of the things that I sort of emphasize is, you think in a different way to your parents. And that's not just because you have different needs and desires than they do. It's also because you actually think differently. You still have some of that wonderful creative thinking process that you had when you were 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. And that will gradually disappear as you get older. So that's a rather roundabout way of talking about my journey. But I started inventing things when I was in my 20s. I invented a rather strange, flexible little microphone that you can stick to a piano, and that became very famous. Frank Sinatra used that, and Elton John, the Moody Blues, and all sorts of people that many of your audience may not even have heard of. But I'm sure some of those will break through. Frank Sinatra, for instance. And so I spent 15 years as an entrepreneur, building my business around those crazy ideas. And when I quit with that, I went back to school and got a PhD in social psychology. And my research was all focused on, yes, you guessed it, creativity. And that has been that's really been my passion and the focus of my work over the past 20 years, looking at how we can use that wonderful skill, innate skill that we have called creativity in our everyday lives to make our lives better, to make our lives more balanced in the way that we see the world.
So then what is creativity? Is there like a fixed, I guess, definition for it, or is there different ways of thinking of the term creativity?
That's a great question. If I'm giving a public talk or something and I say, tell me what creativity is, I'll get all sorts of answers, and people will start talking about the jet engine, the internet, the iPhone. Or they'll start talking about how Aunt Dottie went and bought herself a paint box when she retired and started to paint, So these are all the results of creative thinking, but they're not creative thinking itself. Creative thinking is something that is innate to human beings. If you think about when we were living in caves, creative thinking and that desire, that curiosity was there. That's why we had the bow and arrow and the spear and the wheel, and later on, all the things that led up to what we have now. So creative thinking is the source of our social evolution. We don't have the internet and the iPhone just because we've got opposable thumbs. We've got them because we've got this core human drive called creative thinking.
Okay, so it's just it's just, I guess, it's a part of us as humans since like back when there were cave people. Is that what they called, cave people?
Yeah, it really is. Or to sort of put it into a scientific framework, it is a discrete set of neural pathways. If you use what they call fMRI imaging, we all know what MRI imaging is, right? We fall out of off our skis in the wrong way, and we both broke a shoulder or something. We go in and get imaged. Well, fMRI imaging is fascinating because we can actually see what's going on in real time, and so we can say to somebody, look, we want you to think about this particular thing that's creative. We can give them a little test that shows they're thinking creatively, and we can see certain neural pathways light up in the brain. And then if we say, you know what, we actually need you to calculate what kind of return you're going to get on your retirement, and the thinking mathematically and deductively and analytically, and you'll see some different neural pathways light up. So it's a very it's a scientific process. I mean, it's we've got these different ways of thinking that we have inside our brains. I mean, it's a little bit like saying we can use a different algorithm for a specific type of problem. It's that kind of thing.
Right. That's really cool because, I mean, MRI scans they're static, right? But the fMRI that you're talking about, you get to see it happen in real time. That's cool. That's definitely really cool to see. Then there's like different parts of your brain that all work, right? And then depending on the question that you're asked or the situation or the problem you have to solve, different parts have to be activated. And is there times when both, like let's just say the mathematical and the creativity can happen at the same time?
We can use them both, but we don't use them both simultaneously. So if you have a think about I happen to be a jazz musician. I play jazz flute, and so when I had my jazz band when I lived in Portugal, we had a number of numbers that were sort of classic traditional jazz numbers, and so we all played in tune, in the right timing, everything else for a little while, and then we would each go take our turns to go off and improvise. So there, you're going from a very structured musical space where you all got to be playing together to a very different space, a very creative space where you're improvising, and you've got a certain amount of structure that you have to live within. If you were a painter, you would have the free run of whatever you put on the canvas, but that would be limited by the paints you're using, by the canvas itself, as opposed to using sort of watercolor paper or, so you've always got certain limitations to your how you express your creativity. And that's true, of course, in music, but you can see with the jazz analogy that you can go very quickly from a structured, logical kind of way of doing things to a very much of a creative, freewheeling approach. And that's how we should be thinking about things. We should use the right tool for the job. When we always think analytically or deductively, that imbalance can cause severe problems, and it exacerbates, for instance, burnout. Where burnout can be very, very severe. It could lead to suicide. It can be a really disastrous kind of process to get into. And as we know, that's not restricted to people of any age. It can be associated with very deep depression that can, sadly, the instances of suicide amongst teens has been gradually going up and up and up. And I personally believe that is at least amplified by the fact that we're getting so technological that we tend to leave behind those things creative that would balance our way of thinking. Yeah. So we don't need to be sort of painting or making music to be using creative thinking. But when we are doing those things, we certainly are using creative thinking. But there are other ways of using creative thinking, just in how we look at the world. But either way, that it provides a balance. And for those of your audience who are, creative, they do creative things. I'm sure that they'll recognize that when you're doing something that's not creative, it feels very different to your body. And so that balance between those two ways of thinking is important.
And everything in life needs a balance. You cannot just have a lot of one thing and a little of the other, because that causes an imbalance, which, as you said, can cause burnout. I know, for example, when my dad, he used to work at Microsoft, and he had burnt out when he had passed out at a client meeting, because he had that imbalance of where he had to work every day super hard, push to his limits, sleep late, wake up early, meetings, back-to-back meetings and everything. And my sister and I, we saw him go through that phase. And after he had passed out, the next couple of months were really hard for him, because he found it hard to work and to do anything. And he was in a very dark stage of his life. Luckily, he was able to get out of it, and now he's doing absolutely amazing. But there's some people who don't get that help to get out of that situation. And so when they are in the situation, is it too late to use that creativity, or does that have to be done before? Or is it like something like, if you're in that stage and you, let's just say with the example of music or art, if you start doing that, can that help with, I guess, calming your nerves and making you feel better?
Oh, absolutely. My coaching programs, I have three that go under the heading Banish Burnout, and they specifically use creative thinking. I coax my clients into doing things, and creative thinking is just sort of one term that includes a number of different things, one of which is thinking divergently versus convergently. Analytically and deductively, we're very convergent. We talk about drilling down and focusing in, whereas when we're thinking creatively, it's quite the opposite. It's very divergent. We're seeing much more of the world. So you could do that through a whole range of different things. Going for a walk is a great example. If you're going for a walk in especially if it's not so much, in between buildings, but if you're going out into the greenery, into trees, and you know the outside world, um, that can allow your brain to start freewheeling and take your mind away from all those things that are causing you to stress. And that is basically one of the introductions to the way of creative thinking. And just other things. I mean, the idea behind creative thinking really is that you get out of the ruts that you form of in your everyday life of doing things. So I tell my clients to do a lot of very simple things during the day. I mean, if you're driving to work, take a different route. There are often two, three, four routes you can take to work. Take a different one. You might see different things on the way, a new park you didn't notice, or a new restaurant that looks interesting. If you go to your favorite restaurant, choose something different on the menu, or even choose a different restaurant. So shake things up a little bit and get out of those ruts. And if you find yourself trying to make a decision that is a sort of a knee-jerk reaction, this is how I did it before, so this is how I'm doing it now. That might not be a conscious thought, but if you notice that that's what's happening, then stop yourself and say, you know what, I think I've got some options here. I really can, think about this, because situations are never exactly the same as they were previously. So you have to think a little bit. But all of that is working towards creative thinking. And then you can supplement that if you used to be keen on, I say used to because a lot of burnout people, they've given up with recreation. They've given up with seeing their friends, going out and having a drink with their friends or coffee with their buddies. And so it's important to get back to some of those things. So get back to having recreation. If you used to play tennis every Saturday morning, just go back to it and go back to doing these kinds of things, because that way of thinking where you're allowing your brain to freewheel, which I've been a meditator for 45 years, so I know how important that is to me, to be able to do that, and it stops me obsessing subconsciously on a set of particular situations, and it's just a wonderful experience. And so that anything that can kind of get you to step back and see the bigger picture that's all contributing to your creative thinking capacity.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. It's like basically just doing something even a little bit different that allows your brain to be like, okay, there's something new that allows it to kind of, I guess, open up, right?
Absolutely. And what you're doing is giving yourself a chance to create new neural pathways. And a neural pathway is like a muscle. The more you use it, the more embedded that becomes. And of course, that's true, thinking analytically and deductively. So if you have people that are doing, especially the kinds of jobs where, maybe your dad, I mean, there is creativity in software and in, that kind of work. But maybe he wasn't that end of the Microsoft spectrum. But there are a lot of technological jobs where you can really get stuck in the groove of this sort of analytical, engineering oriented thinking, and that the more you do of that, of course, the more established that rut becomes, that muscle becomes strong in that direction. So to create a new neural pathway is a powerful experience. But the more you use it, the more you get used to saying, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to do it a different way today." The more that muscle becomes established, that allows us to really think that we have options. Because when people are very stressed, and often when they're very depressed as well, when they're burnt out, one of the real challenges is getting them to realize that there are options. That they don't have to keep just thinking about their burnout. They can actually look at the future. There is a future. There is an outside world. We do have options. You're not stuck in the situation you're in necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's a good way to think about it. It's different as well, considering those little things. And one thing that you have is called spherical thinking. What is that, and then how did you come up with the concept of it?
Well, spherical thinking really is that ability to be able to switch quickly between analytical, deductive thinking and your creative thinking. And I came up with that actually in my first book, which was 2011. I was published 2011. And that was before fMRI imaging was really available for research purposes. And so at that point, people used to think of the left brain being deductive and logical and the right brain being creative. And that was debunked by fMRI, by the way. So that concept is, they discovered during fMRI imaging that you actually use all of the brain for both those purposes, even if you use them in different paths, different neural paths. So in other words, you're thinking deductively, it's not uniquely left brain. You'll be using some of the right hemisphere as well. So the idea was really that you create a thinking process that encompasses all of the brain. So you can use both. You can use the brain as a totality rather than a small portion of it. And so it encompasses both this creative and this deductive process.
So then being right-handed versus being left-handed, does that then mean that it's not, I guess, as accurate? Like if someone is left-handed, are they like actually more creative versus people that are right-handed, or is that then, I guess, incorrect?
It's not associated with increased or decreased creativity. One thing that I have, and this isn't scientifically based yet because I haven't had enough samples, but one thing I have noticed is that people who are ambidextrous tend to be more creative than those that aren't. So there may be some sort of a link there, but that's just really in the early stages of research. But no, basically, I mean, your things like the way you use your muscles, they are deeply rooted in different parts of the brain, because it's not that's not really a conscious decision making process. So they're embedded in the brain in a different way. But it's just generally speaking, when you're thinking in the using the nervous system that is not the autonomic nervous system is the one that we use automatically. If we want to walk, we don't have to sort of think, oh, I'm going to tense this muscle in my leg and then that one in my foot, and then I mean, you'd be exhausted before you've made 100 yards. But so that's the autonomic process, and those are embedded in different parts of the brain. But this kind of thinking that we're talking about really isn't. That can be used, and the same sort of neural pathways associated with creativity in one person may not be the same ones in somebody else. But in both those people, there will be different neural pathways for deductive versus creative thinking.
Okay, so that's just, I guess, it makes it unique. So each person has their own unique creativity, their own unique way of thinking of things.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that.
And then why is it that creative people don't feel like they can fit in all the time? Or like, why do they feel like outcasts in certain situations?
When you're being creative, the important thing is that when you're being creative, it is your difference from other people that becomes important in your mind, subconsciously. You're not actively thinking, oh, I need to be different to everybody else I know. Subconsciously, it is your uniqueness that comes to the forefront of your mind. Now, when you're with other people, and as you know, our connectedness with other people is another incredibly deeply rooted drive that we all have. And it's an incredibly important drive. It's very important in our evolution as human beings. I mean, safety in numbers is not just a cliche, it's a reality. And if you deprive somebody by solitary confinement of that connectedness with other people, then for most people, I mean, they will start to have deep psychological problems if they're kept in isolation for any length of time. So, it's very important. But when you're with other people, it is your similarity to others that's important. So if you were to put on your motorcycling leathers and go down to the Harley Davidson meet at the weekend, it is your similarity to others that you're going to be wearing things that are associated. If you go to an ice hockey game, your favorite team. You may choose to put clothes on that represent that your favorite team, the colors of the team. And
Yeah.
so, we go out of our way when we're being when we're wanting to be a part of a group, to connect with that group by doing things that are similar to it. So these two are in conflict. On the one hand, you want individuality when you're being creative. On the other hand, when you're not being creative, when you're wanting group membership, then it is your similarity to others. Or people that are going to be the individuality end of that, of course, is associated with creativity. That's the key thing here. So, if somebody that's highly creative will have less of a tendency to be with a group. I mean, my extraordinarily artistic half sister, for instance, who's 90 now. I mean, she'll still bundle paints and canvases in the car, and she'll disappear for weeks to paint up in the hills in Wales, in England, in Great Britain.
Wow.
So, she and you, if you read biographies of highly creative people, they will often do that. But in terms of general society, what it means is that highly creative people are often less likely to mingle in the general group of society. And so that in itself will start to cause psychological problems. You can get around that if you choose your group to be other creative people, because then you won't be a misfit, an outcast. But you've always got highly creative people have a tendency, because they have this loose connection with social norms, to be a little bit of an outcast if they're mixing with the general people in regular society.
That's interesting. So does that mean, does that relate to being introverted as well? Or can extroverts also be um highly creative people who also want time on themselves, with themselves, when it comes to whether they're painting or to music or any other creative expression of what they want to do?
It's a great question, and I think it depends a lot on the extent to which, when you were being brought up, that it was okay to be creative. If you're brought up with highly creative parents, then clearly it's okay to be creative. They're never going to chastise you for being creative. And that's not always the case, of course. If you've got parents that are not very creative, they might disapprove and really not like you to have this only loose connection with social norms. They might want you to fit in. And so if you're in that kind of a situation, you may well end up being an introvert, because basically, there's a certain safety in just keeping your mouth shut. You're not going to say things that offend people, or say things that make you seem weird to people. In my experience, people who are highly creative, but have had support for their creativity right through their especially formative years, but even after that, they will often be very extroverted, because they don't intrinsically care about what other people think. So that, they will just voice their opinion no matter what.
And then one thing that we talked about once before is that you had worked with NASA and the Virgin Group. What was that project? And what was it? What did you build for them? What was it all about? Where did it come from and stuff? It just sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it was very exciting. When I finished my PhD studies, I was appointed the visiting professor of creativity and entrepreneurship at the Newport Business School in the UK. And one of the reasons they wanted me on board was because I had quite a lot of experience in designing training programs. I basically designed training programs for the Virgin Group and NASA, Smithsonian, and I did workshops, and I worked with their executives on a one-to-one basis. And basically, that was focused primarily on creating environments that are conducive to innovation. A lot of these organizations have an innovative kind of task. I mean, NASA, has really always positioned itself as being, the cutting edge of space design, space activity, and aeronautics activity in general. And so in the course of time, they felt that they'd lost that real drive to be innovative. So that's really where my executive programs came in, because to help them realize what they needed to do to get that back. And it was based on the things I've just been talking to you about, that it's based on some obvious stuff as well. Like, it's okay to fail. If you've got this fear of failure in your mind, sort of, oh, I'm going to be sacked if I do this and it doesn't work, then you're never going to take that step that is necessary to see if something works, So you've got that, but you've also got this whole thing about it's okay to have some time on yourself in your work, because in the workplace for many, many decades now, team building has been, that's the big flag wave. We must have a team. We was to, let's get people in to help us build teams. Well, that's fine, but when you're building teams, you're focusing on the group end of that dichotomy that we talked about. So you're focusing on people fitting in, getting on together, as opposed to their individuality. And team building is not good for creativity and innovation. So you have to go in and say, look, team building is just wonderful for certain parts of what you do, but let's focus now on when you show your individuality, when you create things that are basically, focus on doing new stuff, thinking new stuff. You don't have to be focused on repeating the old stuff. And so, that's really how that started.
That's super cool. And then, so yeah, working individually and then also working on teams, they have different, I guess it's like different when you're going to think about your ideas, because it's easier when you're with yourself because you can think more, you can be more open. But when you're with a team, everyone has their ideas, they want to share it, and finding that idea to work on can also be hard sometimes. But having that balance is important.
If you think of a department in a business organization as a group of jazz musicians, there are going to be parts of that work where you need to work together. And you need to, come together to, get the plan to work and all that kind of thing. But there's also going to be parts where you need that innovation. You need people to be thinking individually in order to introduce creativity, to find the most creative way of solving a problem or building a particular product or whatever.
And it's something that I think if people can try it out, it could probably help with their creativity.
Absolutely. And it's really important for your generation to understand that, because more and more people who employers, future potential employers, have really got sick of looking through 300-400 resumes for a particular job and seeing exactly the same things there. And they're crying out for two things. One is creativity. They want to see somebody come in with something different, something more creative when they're looking at a job application. And they also, there's a very big drive to try and find people with emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence, interestingly, if you look at the good old fMRI imaging, emotional intelligence has the same neural pathways that creativity does, which is interesting. So, it really is a double whammy, focusing on the creative part of it, and creativity, by the way, is associated with happiness. So people doing something creative, measurably, scientifically. I mean, I've published papers on this, and it's a sound psychological thing. They tend to be happier if they've got creativity in their work and in their lives. So it's a triple whammy. It's you're more likely to get a job if you're thinking creatively rather than just giving all your stuff to ChatGPT and say, write me a resume. Think creatively about what you can contribute with your creativity. What have you done in the past that's been creative and successful? This is the kind of stuff that people really want to look at. If you're applying to do work at any age, you can be 70 trying to get a job through Upwork, or whatever age it is. If you can generate the notion that you're going to think about this creatively and come up with a successful outcome using your creative brain, then intuitively people understand that similarity between emotional intelligence and creativity. It's surprising when you first hear that connection, but when you begin to think about it, it makes sense, because emotionally intelligent people tend to be able to step back and see the bigger picture, which is an absolutely vital part also of leadership. If you're focused on one little thing, as a leader, you're not likely to really stand out as being particularly good. But if you're able to step back and see the whole picture, just basically historically, and the options for the future, and who's doing what, and how you could improve, the allocation of work and all these kinds of things, you're going to be a better leader. So there's a lot of power in this process.
Yeah, and out of all of the stuff that you said, like everything was spot on in my opinion. But like out of those are things that we don't learn at school. Like throughout all, like I'm in grade 11 now. I was in school, we didn't learn anything about what emotional intelligence is. We didn't know about creativity the same way, because they don't, like, all they do is they teach us, yes, they teach us art class and music class, but they don't teach us about creativity, about being out in nature or other ways of being alone and stuff. They teach us team building. They teach us, it's like they teach us everything opposite to what you just taught us and me, right? So it's different. But the thing is, those lessons that you just taught are so essential in life. Like when you're talking about in getting a job, everyone's resumes are the same because they're all taught the same things in the same schools. But the people that are creative or learn that emotional intelligence, which obviously is not taught at school, those are the people that will end up getting hired. Or if people want to go into the route of business, if you're doing the same thing as everyone else, you have to still have some sort of creativity to be able to start that business or get in the job that you want to do. And one part that I wanted to latch onto was when you were talking about ChatGPT, that I know is definitely going to dim and is dimming a lot of people's creativity, especially when it comes to whether it's art or school assignments or, as you said, the resume. They just put it in there and think that it's just going to push it out for them. But I don't think people don't realize that they're sabotaging themselves more than anything, because it's that creativity that's going to be harder to get back when you're older rather than when you're younger. One thing my dad says is he loves how Microsoft called their AI Copilot, because it's not the main thing driving your life or your business or your job or whatever it is that you're doing. It's on the side to help you. It's an assistant. It's your co-pilot. You are the main pilot about it. So if you have like a resume, for example, don't have it write it for you. Maybe ask it about how can I improve it without directly telling me what to do. Or to, when it comes to, let's say if you have like a business proposal, instead of having it create the whole thing for you, have it explained to you so that you know what you can change so that it can still open up your mind more, and use that as a tool rather than as the main driving force.
Absolutely right. And you've hit on a great point there. There was a study about a year ago that it got quite a bit of publicity, but I don't think most people know about it. But it basically it included IBM, it included several big organizations, and they found that CEOs and C-suite folks, executives that used AI on a daily basis were more likely to have poorer critical thinking skills than those that didn't. And I think that reflects exactly on what you're talking about. So, if you're going to use AI, the trick really is you can treat AI as if it's, just this genius employee that you've just found. And you've got two choices. You can either sort of say, well, I can train this person and give them, everything I've got, and I'll have more time to play golf. Or you can say, this person is a complete genius and I can learn a lot from them. And so, because our brains tend to be intrinsically lazy, we spend a lot of time, psychologically trying to find the easiest route to a solution. A lot of times I think people just use AI as, well, I'll just shuffle off all these problems to AI and that'll be that, without really reflecting on the ways that AI can actually help your knowledge base, help the way you think about the world, and help you, at a much deeper level. In other words, teach you things. And so I think you've hit on exactly the issue there, and that piece of research might be interesting to you because it really hits that nail on the head. And of course, people really don't like that at all. I mean, if I'm talking to people who are aware of that research, they try and find faults with it. It was a very good piece of research. Well, yeah, but it's just one piece of research, because they don't want the idea that there's anything wrong with using AI under any circumstance. So yeah, you actually hit on a great point there.
Thank you. Yeah, and one thing I want to also add is like when AI did come out, my dad taught me how to use it in a way so it can help amplify my learning. So I'm homeschooled and I don't get teachers to be with me all the time, or even when I was in school, I couldn't obviously bring a teacher home and ask them to help me with my homework. So what my dad said is ask ChatGPT or any GPT that you use to explain what the question is asking, to teach it to you, and then, but like without it giving you the answer, but for it to just, I guess, explain it to you as if it was a teacher. It's like having a teacher with you 24/7. And it would explain it to me, and then I'd ask you, okay, can you give me questions like this, but with different numbers and different concepts so that I can fully understand it? Until I do, then I'll do my assignment. But he says to use it as a tutor or as a teacher so that it can help you. And I think that's a way that teenagers should probably use it nowadays with their assignments. Instead of asking it to just do the whole thing, use it to teach you so you can understand, because it's you're just going to make your own life harder if you end up letting it do the thing. Because if you have let's say a test and they take away all your devices, I'm not really sure what you're going to do if you've been using AI for the whole thing. So I think it's important that everyone should be learning and using AI to help you, but not do everything for you.
Well, I think you have a very, very astute father. I think he's absolutely spot on the money there, and I think that's true as a student, but it's also true, in terms of just using AI in a small business. If you don't actually understand what it's doing, um, it can hallucinate and give you strange answers and things. And if you don't understand exactly what it did to get there, you'll never know that. You'll just think just the right answer, even though it's giving you rubbish.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Well, so far, this conversation has been absolutely amazing. I don't want to end it, but we are close to the end of our time. So we'll be going into the mystery question segment and then the would you rather questions to end it off.
Great.
So the question for you, which is from one of our previous guests, is what was something that you noticed about you as a child that you still use or have as a characteristic now as an adult?
I learned to be in charge of my own life from a very early age, and I was able to. I was able to gain competence in areas of my life from a very early age. And it also kind of showed me that, every cloud has a silver lining. And so, negative things that happened to me later in life, I found myself getting in the habit of saying, sort of, oh, okay, so what's the good side of this? And inevitably, there was a good side of this. So that's always been with me, and it's been led to some very powerful lessons.
And what would be like your mystery question for the next guest?
My interest would be what went on in your teenage years that appeared to be very negative that you subsequently have found to be positive.
So, what happened in your teenage years that you found to be negative but ended up being positive?
Yes.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Very different from some of our previous ones, but I'm looking forward to see what our next guest will say about that one.
Then your next guest will probably be upset about it and say, well, who's the Looney Tunes that came up with this bizarre question?
That's why we call it mystery questions. No one's going to know. That's what keeps it fun and surprising. No one's going to know who gave it, so it just keeps it like exciting and on your toes.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so now we're going to just go into the last part, which is our would you rather session. I'll go with 3 questions, and you're just going to have to choose which one you would choose out of the questions. So the first one is, would you rather sneeze glitter or cry jelly beans? It's a weird one.
Oh, I think sneezing glitter.
Sneezing glitter?
Sure.
Okay. The next one is, would you rather have a theme song every time you enter a room or a dramatic narrator explaining your life?
I think my life is too complicated for a narrator to explain it. I'll go with the themes. I think I'll go with the theme song.
Okay. Do you have an idea of which theme song you'd like?
Yes. Fleetwood Mac.
I don't think I've heard of them.
Fleetwood Mac was a fabulous musician of the 70s and 80s. And Man of the World is his song that I would choose.
I don't think I've heard of that one, but I'll probably have to listen to it now. Okay, and then the last one is, would you rather have a goose that aggressively protects you at all times, or a sloth that insists on being carried everywhere?
I'm not sure I would want to have responsibility for a sloth all the time. I'll go with the goose.
Okay. Little goose bodyguard.
Yeah, exactly. A bodyguard sounds pretty nice to have, I think, yes.
Yeah, and a goose sounds, it'd be terrifying to have as one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Walking everywhere.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mr. Walton. This was an incredible conversation. I enjoyed it. There was a lot to learn. And I really do hope that our viewers got something out of this to learn and hopefully apply in their life as well. So for anyone who's watching, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash that like button, and comment below what was something new that you learned from this episode. I'll see you next time on the Young Leaders Podcast.